Good afternoon to everyone. Today I want to talk to you about the second principle of financial security. I spoke some time ago about the first principle of financial security, which is tithing. Putting God first in your life, acknowledging and honoring Him with the first fruits of your substance, putting your money where your mouth is, as the vernacular would put it. The second principle is a little different matter. You probably have heard a number of preachers in your lifetime speak about the first principle, about tithing. I doubt if you've heard quite so many discuss the second principle, and there may be a reason for it which would become apparent as we go along. One of the statements of this principle is found in Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 22, and it's very simple. It says, "A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children." Now, why would that be a principle of financial security? When you think about it, actually, it seems like an additional financial burden, doesn't it? Because not only do you have to think in terms of tithes and of offerings, now all of a sudden I'm suggesting to you that there is a biblical principle that God has set forth for us, looking ahead to our own financial security, that says a good man lays up for an inheritance for his children's children. Even the expression children's children is interesting in that, because it implies not merely saving up something so you can leave it to your children so they can squander it. It seems to be talking more in terms about an inheritance that is not only passed on to your children, but is preserved for their children. And in the process of time creates a permanent reservoir of wealth within a tribe, within a family of people. Paul mentioned it in passing while he was talking about a completely different matter. In 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 14 he says, "For the children ought not to lay up for the parents, but the parents for the children." I think it's very important that we understand this principle, because in our world today, we seem to be looking for our security in an exactly opposite direction. For example, in the social security system that we have in this country, which is supposed to provide for our security in our old age and a few other types of circumstances that we might have, I don't know, how many of you feel that you understand the social security system in general? May I see a show of hands just out of curiosity? I only see a couple. And quite frankly, if I hadn't added the words in general, I might not have got those hands up. Because the social security system is rather complex. I wonder how many of you think that in the social security system, that throughout your working life, as you pay money into that security system, that money is held and invested and saved and what have you for you, and that money is returned to you when you reach old age. Nothing could be further from the truth. The whole idea of the social security system is that the children lay up for the fathers, because the working people today are paying money in which is paid out to their own fathers and mothers, elderly relatives and other peoples and so forth. In other words, the last generation is being supported by this generation, whereas the biblical principle says this generation should be laying up for the next generation, not for the last one. The idea behind the Social Security system wasn't all bad. The idea was that we can have something for nothing, in one manner of speaking. That because the population is expanding, and because the economy is expanding, and because wages are going up, then this generation can easily take care of the last generation. The only problem is it hasn't turned out to be that way. In fact, Howard Ruff and others speculate that the Social Security system may be, in fact, they assert that it will be, the fundamental underlying cause for the eventual collapse of our economic system, which they say is certain to come. It is only a matter of time. I'll leave it for you to study Social Security, to read perhaps Howard Ruff's book and read his theory of why he thinks that will come to pass. I simply point out that we have such an interesting situation to where we have taken an exactly diametrically opposite approach to this matter of security from what the Bible seems to indicate would be advisable for man to follow. Now, why does God say the children ought to lay up, the children ought not to lay up for the parents, but the parents for the children? Why did Solomon say, a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children? Well, take a look at our society and see how it works. All of us, I think, are fairly well aware of the plight of elderly people in this country who live on fixed incomes. Long ago, we adopted a Keynesian approach to economics, which was an idea that if you can increase the money supply and you can expand the economy, and then the growth in the economy provides more wealth, and that therefore all of us can increasingly be better off in the process of time. And to some degree, and up to a certain point, it works. It works in the sense that I was asking a relative of mine how long he had to work when he was a young man. We were discussing the price of gasoline, how much it costs today, and it only costs 20 cents a gallon or 10 cents a gallon or something like that when he was a young man. I asked him how many hours, though, he had to work in order to buy a gallon of gasoline in that day compared to now. He had to work a lot more hours to buy a gallon of gasoline when he was a boy than he does today. So in that way, it seems to work on some things. Even though prices keep going up, wages keep going up, and so forth. However, if you happen to be old, and you happen to be stuck with a fixed income, a pension that is not adjustable, or even with Social Security, this economic system is an unmitigated disaster for you. And I have a feeling there are a few people in this congregation that feel like saying amen out loud when I get through making that comment. It is really a sad plight. My wife was telling me about her mother was explaining that back when she had originally went on Social Security, when she first started, she got, I believe, $60 a month or $80 a month, I forget which, from the Social Security system. It was adequate to pay her food and her utilities when she started. Well, because the cost of living has gone up, she has gradually gotten increases in her Social Security payments, and she now gets the grand sum total of $300 a month in Social Security. But now it falls well short of her food and her utilities. The cost of things around her keep on going up, but her income simply does not go up at the same rate. Other people are not even blessed with any increase in their income at all, and so we wind up getting in that difficult situation. But fortunately, my wife's father had earlier in his life invested in real estate and a few odds and ends, and had managed to leave his wife in a little better situation than that, so that she doesn't have to live exclusively on Social Security in her old age. Now, I think it would be worth our time for a moment to contrast the Social Security system, this backward system we're talking about, with the other way of doing things, the way of maybe going investment for your children's inheritance, something which probably many of us feel like we can't do. But wait a minute, let's listen a moment, and let's consider this in a sort of an abstract principle rather than immediately trying to figure out what we can do about it at this moment. If a person on Social Security, if you were in that situation and you were receiving $300 per month in Social Security month after month, when you die, how much will your children receive? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Now, $300 a month coming in from Social Security, if you had to find a way through investment to create that for yourself, how would you have had to have gone about it? If you had been saying, okay, during my working years, I'm going to invest enough money to produce $300 a month when I'm age 65. How could you go about doing it? We're going to assume that you want to retire at age 65 instead of working to 75 or 80 or whatever it is you want to do. We're going to take some assumptions today, and we're going to look at them and analyze God's way and the way man has figured out for himself to try to do these things. How much would you have to have at age 65 today, let's say, if you were 65 today, to produce that $300 per month? Well, if you were to invest today in a secure, A-rated corporate bond, you could get somewhere between 10 and 11% return on your money. There might be some other ways of going. We'll take that one for this purposes. And you would earn that rate on your money invested, the money you put in it right now. You get the same amount of money right on out to the year 2004 on one particular bond that I know about. Plus, of course, at that period of time, you'd be able to sell that bond. If you bought $36,000 worth of the bond today, you could sell them in the year 2004, your children could, for about $46,000 because the bonds are presently being sold today at a fairly good discount. Now, in order to earn this money, then you get a 10% rate of return. That's $3,600 per year at $300 a month. It works out to be the need you'd have is $36,000 at age 65. Seems like rather an impossible thing maybe from where you're sitting right now, but let's think about it for a moment again. What the government then is paying out when it pays out to an elderly person today $300 a month, they are paying out the equivalent of the income, if we do well in our investment of it, of around a $36,000 nest egg. The only problem is that when we're gone, the government keeps that nest egg. We don't get it back. It isn't as though there's a sum of money there sitting earning that which can be held and retained and kept for your children. Now, if you were going to think in terms of how does a person, not you, but a person, get that $36,000 to earn that kind of money at age 65 if he were free to opt for a different system from Social Security? Well, if you just divide it out, let's say you started at age 25 and you're going to go to age 65, and you've got 40 years to put all that together, you could actually do it by stuffing the money in the mattress, by stuffing $75 a month for 40 years in your mattress, and you'd come out with that $36,000. No interest, no nothing. Now, I don't know, I meant to ask a few of you on the break, and I didn't get a chance to do it, how much some of you might pay in Social Security at this particular point in your life, and how much a person might pay into the Social Security system over a working career. I think it might be interesting to make the comparison. I wish I had that data for you today. I don't. $75 a month is pretty heavy, but let's suppose that we're not just terribly sharp, we're not going to be terribly aggressive in our investment, that we were able to invest money at a very regular rate, month by month, for that 25 to 65 age bracket for 40 years. We're going to stick the same amount of money every month for that period of time at, say, 7% per annum rate, averaged out over the period of time in our return. How much money do you think you would have to stock away every month to come up with the $36,000 to produce that $300 a month income, which would allow you to starve in not very good style? Less than $15 per month. $15 a month. Now, I have no idea, as I said, I haven't got a comparison over the past 40 years of what the average person might have paid in the Social Security system. And I'm just taking this out of the clear blue sky just as a hypothetical situation, because a person might do less when he's younger and earning less money, and as time goes on, he becomes a little bit more financially secure, inflation goes up, he might be able to put more in. We're kind of talking in terms of static dollars, but there are ways of compensating, at least to some degree, for the inflationary pressures of the environment. But it doesn't seem impossible at $15 per month for a 40-year period of time to get that $36,000 put away, does it? With that rate of interest coming in as a regular thing and building it up? All right, so you get age 65, you take that $36,000 you saved up for all these years. Consistency, and regularity is the key in saving. And you go down and you try to find yourself some sort of investment to invest that in to earn $300 a month. You can do it. You can do it right now in our society, and you can come out with a good clear $300 a month to go out and starve on. Now, after you have lived on this for whatever period of time is concerned and you die, what do your children receive? $36,000. If you have invested in something that does, that is fairly safe and isn't going to, where it doesn't erode away and it's all gone, they've lost a little bit for inflation, but the children are still loads better off than had you chosen the Social Security route if you had a choice, where you get paid $300 a month, and when you die, there is nothing. And have you really lost anything over that period of time by saving that money, investing it yourself, and trying to find some ways of doing it? Now let's think a little further. If you had had this money, this Social Security in your hand for all this period of time, and it began to build up to a fairly substantial sum as the years went on, got up to $3,000, then it got up to $5,000 that you had stuck away. At that point in time, you might have been able to say, wait a minute, here I am sitting in this apartment, paying rent, when I can take that $5,000 and invest in the down payment of my own home, and then the rent that I'm paying now will make my monthly payment. Do you realize that by taking that $5,000 out of your account and putting it into your home, you go way above any 7% rate of return in this society on the money that you got in there? You can begin to produce, by having part of that money in your own home, an inheritance for your children. If you're buying your own home, you are laying up an inheritance for your children. But you've got to do some saving, and you've got to do some investing, and you've got to try to make that money grow. And I think if there is a third principle of financial security, the other principle, and it's a biblical one, is invest it. There is no earthly reason why Jesus, in explaining to these people the parable of the pounds and the parable of the talents, would have ever used that analogy. When he told this man, when he came back and he found that he'd buried it in the earth, he said, why? There is no earthly reason why Jesus, in explaining to these people the parable of the pounds and the parable of the talents, would have ever used that analogy. When he told this man, when he came back and he found that he buried it in the earth, he said, "Why didn't you take my money and give it to the exchanger so I could have earned interest on it?" He would have never chosen that analogy had he not meant for his people to be good stewards and to try to make that money grow. To put their money to work. He did not want to see it buried in coffee cans in the backyard. Let's say if there is a third principle, the third principle is invest, and invest wisely. You may need to get some counsel before you start trying to do that, but I think it's important that we understand what can be done. Well, as I say, you'll have to take a look at your own investments and how much you're putting in Social Security and say, well, I do think maybe there might be a better way. You don't have any choice about the Social Security. But you have to realize that by the time you get around to drawing it, I don't know how old you are right now, like we're all still here anyway, the chances are that all that Social Security will allow you to do is to starve a little more slowly than you would if you didn't have it. You've got to do something besides Social Security, and Social Security will do nothing, absolutely nothing, zero, zilch, as far as laying anything up for your children. Unless it may be in some cases disablement, and the children can draw something for a period of time in certain circumstances. I don't understand all I know about Social Security again. But you may ask, why can you really, as you have done at this point, leave inflation out of the picture? Now, we've already seen that Social Security can't keep up with it, but what about some of the other investment vehicles that a person might try? Well, there are a lot of them that are fixed, and it may well be that you're going to have to take that into consideration. But also there are other possibilities, such as there are investments that are somewhat inflation-proof. At least they are more so than simply a savings account or simply cash in the bank. As some people have found that if they're able to get enough money clear by age 65 to buy one or two or three pieces of rental property, free and clear, that the income from that rental property can provide them with a fairly good rate of return, and as inflation goes up, they're able to kick the rent up by whatever rate of inflation tends to be, and so they can defend themselves. There are things that a person can do and provide for yourself a little bit more security of your own, while at the same time you are laying up an inheritance for your children. It's a different system that this world has, as I say, attempted to get worked out. The key to all this is simple, making all this work for you. It's understanding that you are expected to lay it up or leave an inheritance for your children's children. Now, you notice I call it a principle. There is no place in the Bible where it is codified into some sort of legislative thing, because it would be almost impossible to legislate. And yet you and I, who know what it means to strive for and to try to achieve the will of God, would really take very seriously a statement of God's word. Lays up an inheritance for his children's children. I think we have to understand, too, that in the process of doing for that, we actually provide a larger measure of financial security for ourselves. I think it's fascinating that you get to live on that inheritance when you're in your old age, and it doesn't take a thing away from your children when you die. So the way man does it, completely opposite. Now, the principle itself is very simple, but I know that somebody's going to try to offer an objection or two right away. Didn't Jesus, for example, commend the widow who cast all her substance into the treasury? Sure did. He called that lady when she went by there to his disciples' attention. He said, "Now, I want you to notice that there were all kinds of people who went by there and cast in money. But this poor woman who went by there gave more than all of them, because she, out of her want, cast in everything she had." It was commendable. But is there a circumstance? Could there be a circumstance when it would not be commendable to cast everything you have into the treasury? Was Jesus intending to say, by that example, by his commendation, by his pat on the back, I want all of you, all the time, to give everything you have into the treasury? Now, there's something deep down inside of all of us that says, no, I don't really think that's what he meant. Didn't John write, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world? Yeah, he did. But how would that conflict, and why should it conflict with the statement, a good man lays up an inheritance for his children's children? It doesn't conflict at all. because you don't have to love the world or the things that are in the world in order to be financially responsible and try to take care of your family and your own people. Well, didn't Jesus say that we should not lay up for ourselves treasures upon earth? Turn back to Matthew, if you would, the 6th chapter, and let's take a look at what he said. In Matthew chapter 6, he says, "Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust do corrupt, and where thieves do not break through and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." Now, are we to take from this some indication that Jesus did not intend for us, during our earthly sojourn, to retain any of our income for ourselves? Did he not intend for us to save? Did he not intend for us to put our money to work as good stewards? Does this mean that he did not intend for us to save for our children? Because in truth, when you take money and you put it in a bank, or you put it in land, or you put it in some kind of investment such as art or jewelry, you are laying up treasure upon the earth in one sense of the word for your children. Is this supposed to conflict somehow? Is that what Jesus meant? He goes on to say in verse 24, "No man can serve two masters. You will either hate the one and love the other, or else you will hold the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Therefore I say unto you, take no thought for your life." Now he doesn't mean don't think about it. Don't plan. He says, what he's saying here is don't take any anxious thought. It's a better translation. I think you'll find the more modern translations will say that. What he is saying is, look, don't be anxious about how you're going to live, or what you're going to wear, or what you're going to be putting on. Don't worry. Trust God. But is he trying to say here, does he mean at all that you are to be irresponsible? That you can, as one, that Satan took Jesus up on the top of a pinnacle. He said, "Cast yourself down, for it is written, His angels will bear you up, that you will never dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said, "It is written, you shall not tempt the Lord your God." Is Jesus then trying to tell us that we should tempt God financially by running ourselves right out the limit and say, well, God will take care of it? Is that really what he's trying to say? Now, something deep down inside of all of us says, I read what it says, but I don't think that's what he means. Why would you feel that way? What would you turn to? How would you look at it? Of course, in fact, we have to realize that these things that I've just been reading in Scripture are what some churches tend to want to tell people when they're trying to raise money for support. They'll come along and say, now don't lay up treasures for yourself in heaven, but lay up treasures on earth, but lay up treasures for yourself in heaven. And they'll quote this poor old widow woman who gave everything she had, and they'll exhort the people that really give and give till it hurts, and sacrifice, and so forth. It is true that, in fact, these scriptures are used oftentimes by religious fundraisers when they're trying to intimidate people or shame people or make people feel guilty that they don't cough up, get their wallet out, and give more money to the church. But the truth is that God's way is tithes and thank offerings from your increase. That is, from your current income. God's way is not to erode the capital of His people. Think about it. By capital, I mean your savings account. I mean the equity in your home. I mean that piece of land that you bought over there for your retirement that you thought you could leave to your kids if something had to happen to you. I'm talking about equipment that you have bought. I'm talking about the automobile you drive. I'm talking about the accumulated wealth that you have put together, which you can actually lay up for your children's children. God's way is for people to tithe and to give generous thank offerings out of their current increase in response to their present blessings, not to erode and to take away their inheritance. In the Bible, the preacher that encroaches on the capital of the membership is playing a fool's game. One, he cares nothing for the people. He cares nothing for the people. Two, he is eroding his own future support from these people. Sure he is. Because in the years to come, those people, whenever they invest their money and they make it and things work out for them, and they suddenly find, well, the interest is beginning to build up pretty fast. And then they start thinking, I'm going to tithe on this. And they tithe on their interest. And here comes additional income. That the capital of all the membership of God's church is a blessing given by God from which many of them will respond and give back to God, and the increase of the church in the future is secure. But the preacher who goes out and erodes that capital is playing a fool's game. And he threatens your own well-being in your old age. The time's going to come when you're going to need that capital. And fourth, he is taking the inheritance of your children. Maybe you understand why you haven't heard as much about the second principle of financial security as you would of the first. I know a lot of people have felt, because of the abuse of the tithing system by some people in the past, that tithing was kind of a burden and it was a bad thing, and they were very negative about the concept of the tithe. On the other hand, when you begin to put the thing in perspective and realize that God doesn't want you selling your house and giving it to the church, not routinely. There might be a time, this is not to say that you wouldn't ever dig into your savings to give. Apparently the Israelites did when the time came to build the tabernacle, and again they did when the time came to build the temple, and maybe again when the temple was being rebuilt. There were some times, special offerings, but those were kind of spaced out, not merely by a year or two, but by generations. I don't know if there was ever any more than one time in a generation that kind of sacrifice where they went back in and really dug out of their capital and their equity and various things and things that they possessed that they might give for inheritance to their children and give. Now, they did do it. And there are times, and there may be a time when a person could do that and give the widow's mite, but it should be rare. And it should always come as your choice, and only when you have it to give after your other responsibilities have been fulfilled. Now, what do I mean by these other responsibilities? I want you to turn back with me to 1 Timothy 5 and verse 8. 1 Timothy chapter 5 in verse 8. Critical scripture. Important scripture. Very simple, very direct. But if any provide not for his own, and specially for those of his own house, he has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. Now that's a responsibility that is going to be there. You are held accountable by God to provide for your own, and it is no excuse for you to be able to say, or for come around and say, well, I gave my money to the church. So, if we can understand the way of God, it is really, I think, a much better way than anything you and I would ever devise. Truth is that when the people don't follow the tithing system, income of a work or anything that God is going to be doing is going to be very unstable. Bring ourselves down to the 20th century. And if you've ever gotten on the mailing list of some of these organizations and what have you around the country, you find that because their income is unstable, they have a great deal of difficulty in planning. I got a letter from one of them the other day, followed up by an urgent postcard where, sent first class, where he was really urging upon all of his readership, because he had dropped $200,000 a month in the last 4 months, and it looked like he was going to do it the next 2 months. The total amount of loss from out of his reserves was $1,200,000, taking place just in the beginning of the spring on through until late this autumn. And so he was writing. Pretty heartfelt letter. Very urgent letter. How bad we need help from you. This is a fairly natural thing that happens. Crises develop. When passionate letters are written about giving till it hurts. People are urged to sacrifice. And guess who sacrifices when that type of thing takes place? Guess who it is that hurts when we're talking about giving till it hurts? Guess who it is that gets hurt in all this? The good-hearted, the generous, those whole-hearted people and open-handed people who generally would tend to give the shirt off their back to a man they met on the street because they're that kind of people. They give, they sacrifice, sell houses sometimes, sell land sometimes, they sell jewelry sometimes, they sell heirlooms sometimes. Somebody who hopes that someday, back down the line, he might be able to put on the finger of his bride that beautiful diamond that had been handed down for about 2 generations, find that it was sold or sent off to some religious organization that was having trouble building some kind of an edifice. Is that God's way? I think not. When you see people denuding their savings account and selling homes and land and jewelry and heirlooms that they might have left with their children, they rob their own children. This is not God's way. Now somebody's also going to say, though, yeah, I see your point, but as we approach the end time, as we come up to the time when we see the signs of the times and we see 10 nations in Europe and we see that the end is near and we look ahead and we think we even see in prophecy it's going to come by a certain time. But we may not know the date, but we know it's near, and I know that God's going to come back in my lifetime. Should I then, in those circumstances, give all I can for the final push? Well, let's ask that question and see if we can answer it. First of all, what did Jesus have to say about this subject? He said, you're going to see all kinds of signs. You're going to see famines and pestilences in various places. You're going to hear of wars and rumors of wars. And then he goes on to say, see that you be not dismayed. The end is not yet. And then he goes on with certain other signs that begin to take place. And you could see, as first century Christians did, all these signs taking place and begin to think in your mind, I think the end is here. I think I ought to sacrifice all I can. Well, maybe you should. But on the other hand, Jesus said that the time of his coming was reserved to the knowledge of his Father only. No man knew it. The angels in heaven did not know it. And if I understand him correctly, he did not know it. And if that's true, why in the world should we, who are admonished to watch, and who do watch, and who expect the coming of our Lord, and who look forward to it, why should we assume that we know it? Believe it, and I verily do believe that Jesus Christ is coming back to this earth in my lifetime. But I have to face the fact, I'm not the only person in history who ever felt that way. For not just 100 years, but for 2,000 years. And so I have to understand that that may not be something I ought to lean all that heavily on. But even if I knew, even if I were certain, does that mean that at this point I no longer consider the admonition that a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children? I want you to turn back with me to the 32nd chapter of Jeremiah. One of those prophecies given to us in type that we can read, study, and try to understand the latter end thereof, according to Isaiah. Something happened which I think God realized the tendency of human beings to fall into certain traps and to go certain directions. The word of the Lord, verse 1, came to Jeremiah from the Lord in the 10th year of Zedekiah, king of Judah, which was the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar. For then the king of Babylon besieged Jerusalem, and Jeremiah the prophet was shut up in the court of the prison, which was in the king of Judah's house. He was in jail. For the reason he was in jail was because Zedekiah had shut him up, saying, why do you prophesy and say, thus saith the Lord, behold, I will give this city into the hand of the king of Babylon, and he shall take it. Jeremiah had been prophesying for months that this army outside this city is going to take this city, and we're all going into captivity. Give yourselves up to the Babylonians, and you may save your life. All right? This wasn't a what if. This wasn't unreal. This wasn't something for the never, never land. They could actually crawl up on the wall and look out over the wall and see the enemy that was going to take them captive. Jeremiah had heard the word of God to that effect and knew it and believed it. Zedekiah, the king of Judah, he says, shall not escape out of the hand of the Chaldeans, but shall surely be delivered into the hand of the king of Babylon, and shall speak with him mouth to mouth, and his eyes shall behold his eyes. And he shall lead Zedekiah to Babylon. There shall he be until I visit him, saith the Lord. Though you fight with the Chaldeans, you shall not prosper. And Jeremiah said, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, behold, Hanameel the son of Shallum your uncle shall come to you, saying, buy my field that is Anathoth, for the right of redemption is yours to buy it. So Hanameel, mine uncle's son, came to me in the court of the prison according to the word of the Lord, and said unto me, buy my field, I pray you, that is in Anathoth, which is in the country of Benjamin, for the right of inheritance is yours, and the redemption is yours, buy it for yourself. Then Jeremiah says, I knew that this was from the Lord. It is something that I don't think he would have thought about. Otherwise, normally one would say, why buy land? I mean, it's not, here I am in the city of Jerusalem, and the land is out there under the feet of Babylonian soldiers, and somebody says, buy it? I bought the field of Hanameel, my uncle's son, that was in Anathoth and weighed him the money, even 17 shekels of silver. I subscribed the evidence and sealed it and took witnesses and weighed him the money in the balances. And I took the evidence of the purchase, both that which was sealed according to the law and custom, and that which was open, and I gave the evidence of the purchase to Baruch the son of Neriah, the son of Maaseiah, in the sight of Hanameel, mine uncle's son, and the presence of the witnesses that subscribed the book. Before all the Jews that sat in the court of the prison. I mean, they got this thing wired as far as the witnesses on top of witnesses on top of witnesses, and for a reason. And I charged Baruch before them, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, take these evidences, this evidence of the purchase, which is sealed, both which is sealed and the evidence that is open, and put them in an earthen vessel, that they may continue for many days. For thus saith the Lord God of hosts, the God of Israel, houses and fields and vineyards shall be possessed again in this land. Why was he doing this? He was doing it as a symbol for these people. He was saying to them, and he'd already prophesied, God had already revealed to him, that there were going to be 70 years of captivity, which essentially meant that the people that went into captivity at this point would not be coming back, but their children would. And houses and vineyards would be enjoyed and lived in, and vineyards would be planted in that land during that period of time. So we have to realize that when Jeremiah did this, he was going to show these people that their children would come back into the land, and so will ours. So will ours. There is no reason for us not to buy a piece of land and hold that piece of land for our children because we think the end is near. Jeremiah was called upon to go out and seal and buy a piece of property and set it aside for the future, even though the end of their civilization was at hand. Even though the end of our civilization is at hand, the end of the world is not. There are 1,000 years ahead of us and ahead of our children, many of whom will live into that world and get a chance to enjoy it. So if we're right about the time or if we're wrong about the time, there is no reason for people to be selling off all their properties and putting them into some big push at the end of the time. Not in the pages of your Bible, there is not. It is not God's way. In fact, in the process of doing so, a person may be making one of the most serious mistakes economically that he has ever made in his life, even before God. Because a good man lays up an inheritance for his children. The second key of finance, or financial security, lay up an inheritance for your children and pass it along from generation to generation. Earlier I used this example of the $15 a month. I don't know what it would really need to be, maybe $19.50, maybe $14.75, and maybe it would change through the years, and you'd find a chance that I got a little extra money here, and I worked a little harder, I got some overtime, and I'll sock that away in it, and you begin to develop this little nest egg that you're going to get to live on yourself to your retirement, you're going to leave it for your children later. Supposing that your father had done that, and that his father had done that before him, and that his father had done that before him. Do you have any idea what a difference that would make to you to this day? You get to thinking about it, you begin to realize, and I expect there are a lot of people here in this audience who, as time has gone by, and maybe your parents have died, a civilization in which we've lived, and a society that's created an economic system in which it's almost impossible to live God's way, know what it's like to grow up to maturity and have your parents die and pass on and relatives, and know not one thin dime to come down to your family from your father. But what would it have meant to you if it had? That $36,000 has been dropped on you about age 45, where you had 20 years to retirement to begin to do something with it yourself, to invest it, to make it grow. You ever sit down and figure out, just with a simple rate of increase, maybe you can get 2% or 3% over inflation with some good advice on $36,000 for 20 years? It looks pretty good at the end of that period of time. And beef up your own efforts toward a retirement fund and leave just a little bit more for your children. If your father had done that, and his father before him, you realize that probably your tithes today would mean more to God's church and His work than it would if you gave everything you have. That's why it is so evil to reach into and plunder the capital of God's people. It really is. Now, I don't mean in any way to say that the time may not come when you have been so blessed and feel so strongly and such a surge of generosity in your heart that you reach way back into it after you know you're taking care of your family, and you know you're taking care of your kids, and you even got some land laid up for them, and knowing your kids are doing okay, and maybe you married a girl and she's got something from her family. You say, no, I really want to dig down in there, and I want to give some more to God's work. It may be at a critical time. There may be a moment when just a little bit extra will make all the difference in the world, and maybe you'll want to do that at that time. It would be wonderful if you were able to do that when the time came. But you're going to have to follow certain principles of finances if you're ever going to be able to get to that particular point. I have to think, where would you, and your brothers, and your sisters be today if 2 or 3 generations of your family had followed the principle that the children should not be laying up for the fathers, but the fathers should be laying up for the children? I think one of the things that I get so profoundly impressed by at times is how short-sighted is man and how far-sighted is God. Paul was moved by it at one time on a totally different subject from this one we're discussing today, but he wrote a beautiful statement. He said in Romans 11, in verse 33, "Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and the knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and his ways past finding out. For who has known the mind of the Lord? Who has been his counselor? Who has first given to him, and it shall be recompensed unto him again? For of him, and through him, and to him are all things, to whom be glory forever."